Everyone. Is my screen visible and am I audible? Okay. So welcome to week 8 interactive session for the course Classics in Neuroscience. My name is Ramya Shekhar. I'm a PMRF TA for this course, and I'll be discussing the previous year assignment questions associated with this week's lecture videos, followed by any doubts or discussion that you would like to have. So let me begin with the first question. Which neurotransmitter is released during hypersensitivity reactions? So, in immunology, we know that there are certain problems or reactions that happen when the immune system is acts in an autoimmune way or is overstimulated. And those are known as hypersensitivity reactions. There are different types of hypersensitivity reactions, type 1 to type 4. And during hypersensitivity reactions, uh, immune cells such as mast cells and basophils release certain vasoactive substances such as histamines. And this causes several kinds of things to happen in the cell. For example, it causes the capillaries to widen so that immune cells can pass through them, and several other things happen in the body in different regions of the body because of the release of the neurotransmitter histamine by these immune cells. And because of that, there are certain allergic symptoms that a person can experience. For example, they can experience hives or urticaria or allergic rhinitis, or for example, here you can see that there is angioedema, because of which the region around the kids' eyes have become swollen, and the eyes are not able to open, for example, in this case. So this is called angioedema. That's also a kind of hypersensitivity reaction. So different kinds of hypersensitivity reactions can happen because of the release of the neurotransmitter histamine. Just a minute. Oh, is my screen visible? Okay. Yeah. So, so histamine is released in the body during hypersensitivity reactions such as anaphylactic shock, allergic reactions which cause sneezing, for example, during common cold. Many individuals experience a lot of sneezing, and that is also caused by the release of histamine by the body. And anaphylactic shock refers to an acute hypersensitivity reaction, for example, caused by in certain individuals. For example, if they are stung by a bee or a wasp, then that can lead to extremely acute and possibly lethal hypersensitivity reactions, which are referred to as anaphylactic shock. And all of this is perpetrated by the release of histamine, which is a neurotransmitter. So, histamine has also been shown to be released in the brain and acts as a neurotransmitter in the brain. I mean, that has been shown later. Yeah. So, which neurotransmitter is released during hypersensitivity reactions? It is histamine. Next question. What enzyme degrades the amino acid tyramine in the liver of rats? Okay. So, again, let me go back to the text. So, in the 1930s, it was seen that there is an enzyme that is able to degrade the amino acid tyramine in the liver of rats. And then later studies, I mean more further studies showed that this enzyme is capable of degrading not just tyramine but also several other amine compounds. And because this enzyme is able to degrade such amines, basically uh, through certain mechanisms which were later identified, this enzyme was called as monoamine oxidase. So basically, this enzyme called MAO or monoamine oxidase was the one which has the ability to degrade amino acids such as tyramine. And this monoamine oxidase, so there is monoamine oxidase A and then there is monoamine oxidase B. So this is an image of monoamine oxidase. As you can see, it is attached to the mitochondrial membrane. So it is attached to the outer mitochondrial membrane. And here it is actually in complex with other molecules like FAD. But so there is monoamine oxidase A and then there is monoamine oxidase B. So this is an image of monoamine oxidase B. And these are slightly different in terms of the substrates that they interact with, but both have been shown to be involved in the catabolism of dopamine, for example. So monoamine oxidase monoamine oxidase is basically an enzyme that can degrade amino acids such as dopamine. Next question. In India, what was reserpine originally introduced for? So, in India, lot of folk medicine and ancient medicine, which was practiced earlier, in that it had been shown that this plant, also known as Indian snake root. Its binomial name is Rauwolfia serpentina. This plant was shown to reduce high blood pressure among several other actions. So it was also used for snake bites. It was also used for, in some cases, for looking at insanity. I mean, for treatment of insanity and several other problems. So it was a part of folk medicine, but particularly for reducing high blood pressure. So it was I mean, reserpine itself was not introduced. It was this Indian snake root which was used in in Indian medicine. It was even documented in certain Indian texts that this Indian snake root has the ability to reduce blood pressure among several other activities. And later it was shown that this Indian snake root has this active compound known as reserpine. This information came later. But this Indian snake root was initially used in Indian medicine for reducing high blood pressure. So you will see that in the text over here where reserpine has been described. So I will discuss about reserpine in detail in the upcoming slides, where how reserpine acts and it plays its role and so on. I will be describing that. Yeah. Next question. Which systems are mainly focused on in contemporary stress research? Select all that apply. So this is a multiple correct answer question basically. Again, let me go back to the text. Yeah. So, although nowadays the term stress is used widely by laymen, and almost everyone, like even in daily like conversations, we say that, oh, I'm extremely stressed, or I'm under chronic stress, or that I was very stressed by today's events. So, stress was not actually a term that was that was in common use earlier. It actually came into, I mean, it was actually coined by this person, Hans Sorry, I'm sorry, I do not know the exact pronunciation, but this person was the one who coined the term stress. So, who was this person? He was born in Hungary and he studied in Prague, obtained a medical degree. Initially was at Johns Hopkins in the United States. Then he went to McGill University in Canada. There he was actually working initially on understanding the growth of bones and calcium metabolism. During that time, after that, he started on a project in which he was injecting organ extracts into animals and he was trying to see what is the effect on the different organs of the body. And he saw that if the organism is damaged by non-specific noxious agents, then he saw that there is this typical syndrome that is happening. And the symptoms of the syndrome do not depend on what the damaging agent was or what drug was given. Rather, it was kind of a non-specific uniform syndrome that was that arose because as a response to damage. So whenever there was any damage, there was this typical syndrome which appeared. Just a minute. Okay. Yeah. So there was this typical syndrome which appeared. And that typical syndrome had three stages according to Hans Sell. So what did he see? He saw that the first stage is that initial first 1 or 2 days after the damage, he saw that different organs are affected. So there are different kinds of, there are ulcers, there is edema, there are different kinds of symptoms that are happening in different parts of the body. So that happened in the first 2 days. If the damage was, if they were it was not resolved, if this kind of damaging agent continued, if the kind of the noxious agent continued to affect the system. Next, he saw that the next stage, the the syndrome progressed to the next stage. What was the next stage? The next stage was that the adrenal cortex. So what is the adrenal cortex? The adrenal cortex is, this is the adrenal cortex basically. It is right above the kidneys. So this adrenal cortex became swollen. So he did this experiment in rats, right? So he saw that the adrenal cortex became swollen. Then there was a shift in the anterior pituitary. So where is the pituitary? This is the pituitary gland. It is we discussed the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus and so on in the when we were discussing about the limbic system previously, if you recall. So, in the previous lecture videos, in the interactive session regarding that, we had discussed about the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the interactions between them, the limbic system, and all of this we had discussed. So, he also saw that there is a shift in the anterior pituitary. So we know that the pituitary gland has an anterior pituitary and a posterior pituitary. So the adenohypophysis, which is the anterior pituitary, he saw that there is a change in the anterior pituitary. So, and the adrenal cortex was also swelling. So this second stage he called as the resistance stage. And finally, the third stage or the final stage was which, like even after the resistance stage, if the syndrome progressed or persisted, that was called the exhaustion stage. So these were the three stages that he described. And he initially called this term as, so this the term for this syndrome as general adaptation syndrome, because it was like we discussed, it was a response to damage itself. No, it did not depend upon the nature of the damaging agent, whether the damaging agent was a drug, whether the damaging agent was some kind of like physical damage to the body, or whether it was because of injection of some extract, or like basically the nature of the damaging agent or the pharmacological type of the drug did not matter. Rather, it was a general response which he believed was adaptive in nature to damage itself. So he called it as the general adaptation syndrome. And he observed that during this general adaptation syndrome, there was a liberation of large amounts of histamine. We discussed what is the role of histamine. We saw that histamine is uh, a neurotransmitter which is also released by immune cells. We also discussed that it is present in, it is released in the brain, and it is, I think, if I'm not wrong, it is released by different parts of the brain, for example, even in the hypothalamus. Yeah. And he also showed that there are interconnected hormone pathways. So this was so he's the one credited with the discovery of the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So in the previous lecture videos, we discussed about the vascular nature or the vascular connections that exist in the basically the portal system that we discussed previously. We So that was the anatomical studies, right? He showed that this has the hormone pathways, the interconnected hormone pathways that exist between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So he is credited with the discovery of that. So initially he was calling this as the general adaptation syndrome, and he was using the term alarm reaction. Later he changed that to using to stress. He was the one who coined the term stress for this kind of these kind of symptoms which constitute this syndrome. However, it has also been shown that later, apparently, he regretted using the term stress because for example, in the word stress, for example, in physics, is used as a reaction. So we know about stress and strain, right? So stress is used for to refer to a reaction rather than an action, right? So he apparently later regretted using the term stress for this, but then now, I mean, we use stress, the word stress, almost everywhere to discuss about almost like even our daily experiences, for example, right? And also this also brought in a lot of awareness about like our reaction to our environment, and it also brought in a lot of a lot of introspection into how our body deals with our day-to-day life and whether we are able to cope up with the different kind of stimuli that we are subjected to, and the fact that chronic stress can act as can cause a lot of problems, can act as a precursor to several diseases and so on. So of course, nowadays, however, stress in the scientific context, uh, it is being primarily being studied in terms of the hypothalamic pituitary axis and in terms of the limbic system. So the limbic system, which is responsible for processing emotions and basically the lower faculty, as it is called. Again, we discussed the limbic system in the previous week interaction sessions, where we talked about how the limbic system is responsible for processing emotions and its role in anxiety and so on. Okay. Yeah. So coming back to the question, which systems are mainly focused on in contemporary stress research? Select all that apply. So the correct answer is, so there are two answers. One, limbic systems related to emotion and anxiety, of which, like we have discussed previously, the hypothalamus is also a part. Next, the hypothalamic pituitary axis, or this is now called the hypothalamic. It involves the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary, and the adrenal cortex. So it is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal uh, cortex axis, basically. So that's why it is HPA, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal cortex. And the hypothalamus is this small uh, part of the brain that is located over here, right near the thalamus. Then there is the pituitary, and like we discussed, they all have vascular connections between them. And the adrenal cortex is located right above the two kidneys. And there is a negative feedback that exists. So there's a feedback loop over here. So the hypothalamus releases the corticotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary in turn releases the adrenocorticotropic hormone, or the ACTH, which acts on the adrenal cortex. And the adrenal cortex releases cortisol, which goes back and inhibits the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. So this is a negative feedback loop which exists between the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary, and the adrenal cortex. Next question: what does haloperidol block? So, what is haloperidol, and what is its relevance to neuropsychiatry? Yeah. So, haloperidol was another class of neuroleptics that was discovered in the 1950s. What does neuroleptics means? So neuroleptics was a term that was coined to refer to drugs which are able to, so neuro and leptic. So neuro is the nervous system and leptic is to catch hold of or to seize. So drugs that are able to seize the nervous system. So, so one more class of neuroleptics that was discovered in the 1950s, in addition to that others that were discussed in the lecture videos, is the butyrylphenol, uh, which is also called as haloperidol. So Janssen and Tollenaire wanted to find out compounds that were even more effective than uh, the drug uh, chlorpromazine. So chlorpromazine was a drug that was initially used, I mean, was shown by Henry Laborit. We'll come to that later. So it was shown by Henry Laborit to act as an antipsychotic drug. So I will be discussing that in some time. But anyway, uh, although chlorpromazine was shown as an effective antipsychotic, but Janssen and Tollenaire wanted to find out even more effective compounds than chlorpromazine. So they decided to start with the diphenylpropylamine series. Am I audible and is my screen visible again? Okay. Yeah. So Janssen and Tolenade wanted to find out, they wanted to synthesize even more effective compounds as compared to chlorpromazine. So chlorpromazine, although it was effective in calming patients who had psychosis, it also had a strong sedative effect. Sorry, it also had a, yeah, it also had a, I mean, it, and there was a lot of um, like morphine like effects that it had. So it was, they wanted to synthesize compounds which had reduced morphomimetic effects but increased calming properties as compared to chlorpromazine. So they decided to start with the diphenylpropylamine series, and they said, okay, let us try to increase the. They initially started to they started with the series to increase the analgesic power of a member of the series called pethidine. Uh, so then they started synthesizing different derivatives, and their objective was to reduce the pain dulling effect or the morphinomimetic effect. So uh, the effect that is associated with, so like for example, morphine is associated with dulling pain, right? So early days, for people who were in severe pain, they used to be given morphine. So morphine is known to dull pain, but they wanted to reduce the pain dulling effect of the drug, and they wanted to increase the calming properties, because if the objective was to make a compound which can act as a uh, antipsychotic drug basically. So to make people who were agitated or who were having manic depressive disorders, or like basically who were like in a lot of having psychotic episodes, for those people they wanted to make a drug. So finally, they came up with this R1625. So R stands for research, and 1625 is the number of the compounds that they had synthesized. So once they had basically synthesized 1625 compounds. So R1625 was, they renamed it as haloperidol, and it was a type of butyrophenone. And this they basically came up with this in February of 1958, and it was seen that haloperidol acts much faster, it is more long lasting, it has fewer side effects, and later it was shown that its mechanism of action is basically that it blocks the dopaminergic D2 receptors. So basically, it because it is able to block the receptors of dopamine, it is able to act as a you can say as a dopamine antagonist. And because of that, it is able to calm down agitated patients. And it could be used in the case of patients who had psychosis. For example, in case of schizophrenia, or in case of manic depressive, um, like mania, for example, so on. So what does haloperidol block? It blocks the D2 dopaminergic receptor. And the D2 dopaminergic receptor is one of the receptors for dopamine in the nervous system. And by blocking the D2 receptor, it is basically able to act as a dopamine antagonist. Next, who is credited with inventing the digital computer? Again, I'm going back to the text to discuss this. Here. So this is John, excuse me. This is John Atanasoff. He was a professor of physics at Iowa State College in Iowa. And he was the one who first came up with this idea that maybe it is possible to use electricity and electronics, and especially by using base 2 or binary numbers for calculations, and for using memory to store the calculations. So the data that you input, as well as the calculations that the computer makes, as well as the output, so all of these can using a memory to store all of these, and computations by direct logical actions. So these are the ideas that he came up with while he was working as a professor, and it was quite interesting. So he says that he came up with this idea. So he was having a lot of unformed ideas in his, partially formed ideas in his head, but he was not able to actually come up with a proper idea. And apparently he went on a drive in the middle of the night at a very high speed. Apparently he went on this drive, and during this drive, like a car drive, I think it apparently struck him how that this is the kind of device that he should make, so that he can rather than an automated system, sorry, rather than an analog system, a a digital computer should be made. And this is these are the properties that that device should have. So this was his, I mean, him, and like during that time several other individuals are also trying to pursue this, but he is the one who was most clearly documented, you can say, for example. So John Atanasoff was the one who is credited with the idea, or the one who came up with this kind of the features and the idea of a digital computer. And he, together with a graduate student called Clifford Berry, spent 2 years to make a prototype of this computer. So this computer was called the Atanasoff Berry computer, or the ABC computer. So ABC. So this is a replica of the Atenos of Berry computer that Clifford Berry and John Atanasoff made. He spent almost 2 years to come up with this prototype. He wanted to patent it, but the war came and he could not patent the idea of this computer at that time. He also showed, while he was designing the computer, this prototype, he showed what his idea to John Mauchly. So John Mauchly was actually trying to study, he was trying to make lots of calculations to study climate. And during that time, John Mauchly and Atanasoff came in contact, and Mauchly even went to see the prototype that Atanasoff was working on, and discussed his ideas and so on. And later, Mauchly then went on to take a course in advanced electronics at the Moore School of Engineering at the University of Pennsylvania. And then he came up with his own computer that is called the ENIAC. So we'll come to that again. There are some questions in whose context we will be discussing the ENIAC. So anyway, coming back to the question, who is credited with inventing the digital computer? It is John Atanasoff, who first came up with an idea that this is how a device should be built, which will have a memory for storing the computations, and it should have electric and electronic components for making such calculations, and the use of base 2 or binary system for the storing the information and for processing and so on. Next question. What was the name of the digital computer prototype built by John Atanasoff and Clifford Berry? This we just discussed. It was the ABC, or the Atanasoff Berry computer. And this is a replica. So at that time, the prototype they built was extremely huge, because, of course, at that time the machinery that they were using, which was like relatively comparatively extremely primitive, and therefore the size of the machine and the electronic equipment, electronics and the electrical wirings and all of that was extremely, it took up like extremely large spaces as compared to our current computers. So this was actually a very, very large system which took up a lot of space. Next question. Which mathematician proposed the concept of a Turing machine in 1936? So this is an image of Alan Turing. And Alan Turing was a mathematician, and he was working on, basically, he was a mathematician in England, and he proposed that there could be a machine which could read an infinitely long tape in a digital logic manner. And basically, in principle, theoretically, basically, could compute any number, or it could basically carry out any computer algorithm. But of course, if you under, I mean, if you think about it, this kind of machine, which can read an infinitely long tape, cannot exist in practical life, right? Because that means that you would have to supply that machine with, first of all, an infinitely long tape, and it could also require an infinite access to power, and it basically it would require, it would require lots of infinite, other infinite provisions, and therefore this kind of Turing machine cannot exist in practical real life. However, it in principle or in theory, there could be a Turing machine which can do this kind of, which can carry out this kind of um process, in which it can read an infinitely long tape using digital logic. But this idea of a Turing machine basically exposed the limitations of mechanical computing. Again, Alan Turing only proposed this kind of machine. He did not actually build a machine. And this term, the Turing machine, was actually coined by his mentor rather than Turing himself. And the machine was actually never built. It only became a symbol. And Alan Turing became extremely famous for proposing this kind of machine. Excuse me, just a minute. Yeah. So Alan Turing, who was a mathematician, was the one who proposed this Turing machine. And remember, it is only a concept. It is not an actual physical machine. It is on he only proposed a concept of such a machine, and that allowed him and others to understand various principles in the field, and that's why Turing became extremely famous for proposing this concept. Next question. What concept did John von Neumann use as a model for constructing the computer? Now, who was John von Neumann and what was his contribution? Hmm. So, John von Neumann was from Budapest in Hungary. He studied mathematics and chemical engineering in Zurich, and he during World War II he became a part of the Manhattan Project. So the Manhattan Project was basically an undercover project which was responsible for building the atomic bomb. So various scientists across the United States were recruited to be a part of this project, and some of them declined on ethical basis, whereas others actually became a part of the project and had made various contributions to this project. And amongst them was also John von Neumann. So when so we discussed about John Mockley, right? Discussed about how John Mockley was someone who was trying to understand climate and perform lots of calculations for that. And he had taken interest in the digital computer that was proposed by John Atanasoff, right? We discussed about how while John Atanasoff was trying to build his prototype, John Mockley had come in contact with him and had traveled all the way to take a look at what John Atanasoff was trying to do and how he was trying to construct the digital computer. And then John Mockley went on to take a course in advanced electronics, and he himself decided to make a digital computer. So John Mockley, together with a brilliant young investigator known as Presper Eckert, together developed this computer called ENIAC. So the ENIAC is an abbreviation for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. So basically they applied to the Ordnance Department of the Department of War, because at that time, remember, the World War was happening. So during the World War, they requested the Ordnance Department of the Department of War that we are trying to build this computer. We think that it might be really useful for the war effort, and could you please help us by funding us for building this digital computer? And they said that this complete electronic computer that we are developing might be useful for example, calculating the trajectory of the bullets and so on. So they built this, John Mockley and Eckert together built this device called ENIAC, or the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. But they finished it only in 1943. And by that, so it was not actually extremely useful for the war because it was built a little later. So what are the features of ENIAC? ENIAC had around 20,000 vacuum tubes. So they rather than using condensers, they decided to use vacuum tubes for making this computer. And it was extreme. You can see that this is taking up the whole room, right? So the ENIAC was about 8 feet high and 80 feet long. So this whole machine was extremely big. This was a whole computer by itself, and it required a whole room for the like carrying out its functions. So however, it was a digital computer, and it was a progress over the earlier prototypes that John Atanasoff, for example, was building. Yeah, and it was funded by the Department of War. Okay, now where does John von Neumann come into the picture? So John von Neumann came into the picture because when the ENIAC was being built, uh, John Mockley and Eckert were thinking of trying to make the next generation computer. So they had built ENIAC. Next, they were trying to make more advancements and build the next generation of computer. So they started with building the EDVAC. EDVAC was called, it was again an abbreviation for Electronic Discrete Variable Computer. And this EDVAC again was they took funding from the Department of War. Basically, they again applied for funding at the Ordnance Department at the Department of War. But at that time, they were being strongly criticized by Vannevar Bush. So, Vannevar Bush was actually a scientific advisor to the President of the United States, and later he also really propelled the funding towards science in the United States. But Vannevar Bush, ironically, strongly criticized EDVAC, and he was saying that it is a waste, and it's a waste of time, effort, money, and everything, and it was not, and he thought that it's not actually very useful. That was Bush's thought on this EDVAC that Mauchly and Eckert were trying to make. At that time, John von Neumann came into the picture. So John von Neumann, because he was an extremely talented, extremely brilliant scientist, and he had recently, like I said, he was in World War II also. He was a part of the Manhattan Project and so on. So, and he had a strong background in mathematics and chemical engineering. So, when John von Neumann came to know, like he heard accidentally about this EDVAC, and he was extremely interested in knowing about it further. Whenever Bush tried a lot to somehow keep Neumann away from EDVAC, because he didn't want Neumann to get involved, and he knew that if Neumann got involved, then EDVAC, EDVAC might succeed. So, in addition to criticizing EDVAC itself, Vannevar Bush also tried a lot to prevent Neumann from being a part of the project involving EDVAC. But Neumann was not like to be deterred. So this is John von Neumann, and he decided that he will become a part of this project. And he was the one who actually gave a lot of intellectual credibility and reliability to the project. So what did he do? He said that he recommended these things. He said that in EDVAC, so initially, Mauchly and Eckert were saying that we will have a stored program to run the calculations through the CPU and a memory for both the data from the calculations and the programs that run them. This was the idea that Mauchly and Eckert were running on. Newman recommended these things. So he said that there should be a central processor unit which carried out all the arithmetic and logical operations. In addition, he said that there should be a unit that so now in modern terms we call this as a random access read write memory. I mean, this is not the exact term that he proposed, but this is basically what we call it now. So a random access read write memory for storing programs and data. And also the use of binary. So we remember we discussed that John Atanasoff was the one who said that it is a good he was thinking that it was a good idea to use binary or base 2 number for calculations, right? This was John Atanasoff's idea that that binary or base 2 numbers should be used. And now John von Neumann also proposed the use of binary words. And he said that serial computation was should be used rather than parallel computation. So, although it was known that parallel is faster than serial one, but he said that series is using binary in series is better than using parallel, is what he said. So these are the recommendations that he made, and that brought in a lot of credibility and intellectual input for the design of EDVAC. And he also became extremely popular for his contribution to the invention of or the making of EDVAC. But what is disputed, or what, I mean, not disputed actually, what people speculate, or what people kind of find a little like people say that could be the reason for the source of Newman's ideas. So two sources are like being contemplated or being proposed. One is that it is possible that John von Neumann, because he had interacted with Atanasov, and Atanasov was trying to build a computer based on binary language. Sorry, here. So John Atanasov was trying to use binary numbers for building his digital computer, and John von Neumann had interacted with Atanasov. So it is possible that he was influenced by Atanasov's ideas on using binary logic for proposing that to make the EDVAC. That is one thing. Moreover, apparently, Atanasov was also going to make one more computer, but he was told, so he had started making one more computer, but during a meeting at the facility where he was basically trying to build this another computer at the naval ordnance facility, there during a meeting he had initially started, he wanted to for the naval ordnance department, he had started building this another computer at NSOF. And during that time, during one of the meetings, he was at NSOF was told that no, sorry, we cannot fund you for this computer any longer, and the project was cancelled. And one of the people Atanasov later recalled was part of that meeting was John von Neumann. So one of the people who were present in that meeting who told Atanasov that the meeting in which Atanasov was told that his new computer will not be built, they will not fund it. One of the people present in that meeting was John von Neumann. And apparently, John von Neumann had also praised Atanasov after the meeting for his knowledge of engineering and logic, like engineering and electronics and so on. That is speculated to be one source of John von Neumann's ideas for the construction of the EDVAC digital computer. The other source is regarded to be his understanding of biological systems, particularly the brain, because of his interactions with two other scientists. So, John von Neumann had interacted with Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts. And Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts had basically come up with a very simplified representation of the nervous system. So, an extremely oversimplified representation of neurons and neuronal connections, which are performing logical operations. They had come up with this oversimplified network of neurons. And John von Neumann apparently had come in contact with that. And it is possible that he used his understanding of that for the construction of a computer. So it is made the idea that a computer should have a processing unit, it should have a memory unit, the similar to the way a brain has memory unit, and the use of binary. So, for example, neurons, the action potential or the impulse is also an all or nothing response, right? So it's like a 0 and 1. So similarly, the use of binary language for making the EDVAC computer. So these are all probably ideas that von Neumann sourced from the this oversimplified network, oversimplified neurons processing logic, which was given by Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts. By the way, John von Neumann died of cancer in 1957. Uh, he was going to actually give a talk on the brain and the computer, but he was at the same time he was diagnosed with cancer and he could not give that talk. However, he wrote a short book on the brain and the computer, which was published shortly after his death in 1957. And he also had several other insights, which we will again discuss later. Oh, yeah, sorry. We also have to discuss about. Um so, like we discussed, that he used his ideas about understanding of how the brains and the neurons work to come up with the uh, theories for how a digital computer should, what are the components it should have, and how it should work, and so on. So, what concept did John von Neumann use as a model for constructing the computer? He used the model of neural networks, which was the oversimplified version of which was proposed by others. But he also had certain other. So, what is the evidence that he used the the oversimplified network proposed by Walter Pitts and McCulloch, that we said that he apparently might have been inspired by. So Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts, who came up with this idea. How do we know that Von Neumann might have been inspired by that? It is because in his text, this is what he has discovered. I mean, sorry, described. First, he described about the role of neurons in the human nervous system and how sensory or afferent neurons are akin to input, whereas motor or afferent neurons are akin to output. So similarly, he said that a digital computer should also have an input and an output. Then all or none character. We discussed about the action potential being an all or none phenomenon. So he said that the computer should also have, it would also be better for a computer to work on an all or none phenomenon. So basically, the binary 0 and 1, basically. Then about synaptic delays. So for synaptic delays, he said that the way neurons have synaptic delays, the digital computer shall also have one, and the use of he was the one uh, advised the use of vacuum tubes as similar to the way a neuron has works, and said that the reaction time of the tubes will be in the order of microseconds, whereas the synaptic time or delay time in humans or in the synapse is in the order of milliseconds. So, on the basis of these descriptions that von Neumann had provided, it is speculated that he probably used his understanding of biological systems to come up with his ideas for the construction of a digital computer. Next, what fundamental problem did researchers face in representing the nervous system in simulations? So, what were the problems? The initially, when McCulloch and Pitts described their neurons, the problem was that those kind of networks that were initially being described, they were butchering the branching patterns of dendrites. We know that dendrites have extremely branched dendritic trees, right? That was being butchered down to the level of the cell body. So the intricacies of the dendrites and the active properties of the dendrites and the information that is being processed in the dendrites, that was being lost. Next, the synaptic inputs that were distributed at specific levels of the dendritic tree were all focused on the cell body node. So basically the dendrite was completely being ignored. Next, the axonal connections onto specific target cell bodies and dendrites were being shown to be random all-to-all interactions. That was not true because axonal connections were extremely specific and they were happening at specific regions. For example, certain connections were happening with the cell bodies, in some cases, they were happening with dendrites, and they were not random. But the way it was being projected in the earlier networks that were being made, that those were being shown to be apparently all to all random and all to all interactions, which was not correct. Next, the excitatory and inhibitory synapses, which were one way, were being replaced by adjustable weights in both directions. Again, that was not close to the actual representation of the way the synapses work and the way the nervous system work. So all of these, the butchering of the synapse, the role of dendrites to that of the cell body, the shift of focus from the dendritic tree to the cell body node, the use of random all-to-all interactions rather than specific targeted interactions, and the the use of adjustable synaptic weights in both the pre and post synaptic directions. These were all unrealistic. These were all not close to the actual way the nervous system worked. So these are all fundamental problems that existed in the neural networks that were being made. And but later it was by the work of Shepard and others. So it was slowly there was a shift from the more unrealistic networks to more realistic networks. So in which so at the IBM Watson Research Center, Robert Brayton and Michael Shepard, they showed that, I mean, they made more realistic networks in which they incorporated the more realistic simulations. So, in which the dendritic spines, which we know have active properties, which are not passive entities, and the use of the the fact that the dendritic spines are able to amplify the power of neurons, and the use of logic gates of and not at the synapses, and all of these together shifted the more unrealistic neural network designs that were being made to more realistic neural networks that were being generated or which were being proposed. So, what was the fundamental research problem that researchers faced in representing the nervous system in simulations? they the problem that was faced was that there was an extremely unrealistic simplification of dendritic branching patterns and synaptic connections later, which was understood and which people tried to overcome in the uh, later cases. So we discussed that initially the neural networks which were being described were more unrealistic, which were more oversimplified, which were not actually explaining the level of the interactions and the connections and the processing power that existed in the dendrites and in the synapses. And later, this was remedied by work done by several people, and those complexities were also incorporated. Next, who discovered chlorpromazine? So, like I said, that we'll discuss this. So, this was done by the French uh, naval, I think, yeah, he was a naval surgeon, if I'm not wrong. Henry Laborit. So, Henry Laborit was uh, a naval surgeon at Malta. So he was actually interested. So he was working on, of course, he was a naval surgeon, right? So he had to perform surgeries on soldiers. Yeah. So he had to perform, when he had to perform surgeries, he was interested in looking for compounds which can help in calming the patients down before surgery and also prevent surgical shock. So during that time, it was shown that promethazine uh, was shown by Paul Charpentier. So Paul Charpentier was working at the pharmaceutical company Ron Pauling in France, and he had synthesized this drug which he called as promethazine. And promethazine was basically, they were trying to look at antihistamine drugs basically. So while trying to make new antihistamine or to discover to synthesize new antihistamine drugs, Paul Charpentier came up with promethazine. And it was seen that promethazine, in addition to its antipsychotic or antihistamine activity, was also making patients sleepy. So Henry Laborit came to know about this promethazine and the fact that it was making patients sleepy. And he thought that it would be good to have a drug which would calm patients before the surgery, basically, which would have a sedating action and which would also have an antihistamine action. So he thought that the release of histamines was probably responsible for surgical shock. So, surgical shock is basically a sudden drop in the blood pressure of patients during surgery. So, he was interested in a drug which would both sedate the patient or which basically calm the agitated patient before surgery and which would potentiate anesthesia. Basically, it would have uh, have a have an effect similar to anesthesia. So he asked Ron Pauling whether they have some kind of drug which can do that. So at that time, Charpentier had also synthesized this drug called R4560RP, or which they had called as chlorpromazine. But unfortunately, according to Charpentier, they saw that this 4560 RP did not have enough potency as an antihistamine, and that it was too powerful. It was as a sedative. So they were not actually using this. So they had just shelved it. But uh, when Henry Laborit asked for some kind of drug, which uh, he wanted might act as a sedative as well as an antihistamine. So the company, Ron Pauling, sent this drug to him. And he thought he used it, and he thought that it might be very useful in calming agitated patients. And he like recommended several of his friends, colleagues in psychiatry, that why don't you try using it for calming agitated patients. But when they used it, according to them, it was ineffective. So they said that no, it is not. Although Laborit recommended them to try using it, they found it that it was ineffective in most cases. Laborit's colleagues and friends in psychiatry. So, but later it was when, again in Paris, Pierre Deniker and Jean Delay, they tried a new approach. So they said, okay, let us start with small doses and then slowly increase the dosage of chlorpromazine. And they saw that there is a dramatic calming of agitated patients. There is a reduction in their anxiety, and there was improvement in their paranoia and manic psychotic symptoms. And then, because of what they saw and they showed, suddenly there was this huge boom in the number of publications. So in 1952, in 6 months, 11 publications had come regarding the role of chlorpromazine in as an antipsychotic agent. So, who discovered chlorpromazine? It was Henry Laborit who discovered chlorpromazine. As in, he was the one who showed that, oh, this chlorpromazine is actually acting as a calming agent. Next, what effect does reserpine have on patients with schizophrenia? So, before going to reserpine, yeah. So, before going to reserpine, uh, let me discuss about chlorpromazine a little more. So, when Deniker and Delay saw that chlorpromazine is having this calming effect, when used when the dosage was increased from small doses to large doses, they also saw that it had some side effects. So if the drug was given at large doses, then there were some Parkinsonian effects. What did that mean? It meant that there were some hand tremors, there was some rigidity, motor rigidity, and so on. So basically similar to that of Parkinson's disease. And that, therefore, for treatment, the drug had to be used such that it balanced the calming effects as well as the Parkinsonian effects. So it could not be used at high doses because it had the Parkinsonian side effects. And this Parkinsonian effect of the drug became one of the keys to understanding how chlorpromazine is actually having an effect on the brain. What is its mechanism of action on the brain? The drug became so well, the drug was so useful that it was marketed by the company Ron Pauling as large active, or because of its large actions. Basically, it's wide actions. Labart, who was a postdoc at that time in 1953, he saw that, I mean, he came to know about this drug during his postdoc, and he went back to, I think he went back to Basel in Switzerland, and he used this drug on patients, and he showed that it is effective in depression. It's effective in addiction, it's effective in withdrawal as well as in schizophrenia. And the 1952, this was this the calming effect, the dramatic calming effect was described by Deniker and Dilly. In 1953, Lambert showed its effectiveness in these cases. And in 1 year, that is by November 1953, there was a whole symposium on large active. So the first large active symposium was conducted in November 1953 in Basel. And later, the drug was adopted in the United States by Klein. So Klein was one of the scientists who promoted its adoption in the United States, and it was adopted under the name Thorazine. And it was remarked that this was the first time that a single drug was active in the treatment of the major psychosis. So chlorpromazine became a very important drug in the treatment of the major psychosis like schizophrenia. Now coming to reserpine that we were supposed to discuss. So what was reserpine? We again had discussed this for one of the previous questions that we were talking about. So reserpine was actually discovered from the plant Indian snake root or Rauwolfia serpentina. And in India, it was used clinically in the 1930s for its role in reducing high blood pressure, and the active ingredient, the active component of this snake root was isolated by the Seba Drug Company in 1950 for use against hypertension. And it was seen that reserpine, in addition to its role in against hypertension, also had a calming effect. And once this calming effect came to light, it was shown that it might be used as a drug against schizophrenia. So in schizophrenia, a person has becomes very agitated. The person has hallucinations. The person has delusions. The person completely loses touch with reality, basically. So reserpine was shown to have a calming effect and act as a relief to the psychotic one of the major psychoses, which was schizophrenia. And there were and once again, similar to what happened in case of chlorpromazine, there were a series of rapid reports, I mean, a rapid series of reports about the about reserpine in different parts of the world, such as US, France, Switzerland, and so on, in a short period of time. But again, it was shown that reserpine also has Parkinsonian motor symptoms at high doses. So this is similar to what we saw in case of chlorpromazine. And the term neuroleptic drugs was coined by Dilly and Deniker. So Dilly and Deniker were the individuals who had shown the calming effect of chlorpromazine. So drugs like chlorpromazine and reserpine and later haloperidol, these were shown to act as neuroleptic drugs. So basically drugs that seized the nervous system. And this term, neuroleptic, came to be applied to all those drugs that were able to counteract the inner unrest or the agitation or the severe insomnia that happened in case of diseases like schizophrenia, mania, depression, and paranoia. But the problem with reserpine was that it was very slow in acting, and it had extremely high Parkinsonian symptoms when used at higher doses, and therefore it fell into disuse in psychiatry. However, it continued to be used as a anti-hypertension agent. So it continued to be used for its role in reducing high blood pressure. However, it also continued to be used in animal studies. Although it was not used in psychiatry, it continued to be used in animal studies. It also continued to be used in as an agent against blood pressure, high blood pressure. Later, it was shown that the mode of action of reserpine was through its inhibition of the VMAT receptors, or the vesicular monoamine transporters. So the vesicular monoamine transporters, VMAT1 and VMAT2, are basically transporter proteins that are responsible for the reuptake of monoamines such as dopamine after they are uh, release sorry they are responsible for the transport of dopamine and other monoamines in the neuronal synapses. So reserpine inhibits the vesicular monoamine transporters, and because of its ability to inhibit the VMAT transporters, it promotes the degradation of the monoamines such as dopamine by the monoamine oxidase. So if there are free monoamines present in the cytosol, which are not transported by the monoamine transporters, then the monoamine oxidase will degrade them. So because reserpine is inhibiting the VMAT receptors, VMAT transporters, therefore the dopamine and the other monoamines are getting accumulated in the cytosol and they are getting degraded. So going back to the question, what effect does reserpine have on patients with schizophrenia? So the effect that it had a calming effect on these individuals, because patients with schizophrenia already have or already more agitated, they already have hallucinations and delusions and other problems. The use of reserpine this is reserpine. It interacts with the VMAT 1 and VMAT 2, which are basically vesicular monoamine transporters, and it inhibits their activity, thereby resulting in the degradation of monoamines such as dopamine by monoamine oxidases, and therefore reduces the synaptic the neurotransmitter pool of these monoamines at the synapses. Next question. What has replaced tricyclic drugs in treating depression? So first of all, what are tricyclic drugs and what has replaced them? So tricyclic drugs are basically those which consist of a core of three benzene rings in a row, along with an amine group and several carbon atoms. Along with an amine group which is several carbon atoms long attached to the middle ring. So there are three benzene rings in a row, and there is an amine group which has several carbons which is several carbons long, and this amine group is attached to the middle ring of these three benzene rings. So one of the examples of that is chlorpromazine. and these are called as immunodibenzyl compounds. So there was an individual called Roland Kuhn. He was working at a psychiatry department at an institute, and he wanted to study chlorpromazine. But the problem was that chlorpromazine was more expensive. So he asked the chemists at Gigi Pharmaceuticals whether there is a less expensive compound which has structure similar to chlorpromazine, which he can use his for administering on the psychiatric patients. So they gave him G22355 or imipramine, and that had not been used previously. So it was just lying and waiting to be studied basically. He administered this imipramine to three different patients. I mean, he administered to a wide range of patients, different kinds of patients. He tried administering it. But initially, he did not have any success. He was not able to see anything worthwhile. But he continued to persist. And later in 1957, he was successful. He saw that in three patients, there was a change in the way they responded. So he reported that these three patients who were suffering from depression, he saw that there is a success in their treatment by using imipramine. And he reported this in a conference in Zurich in September 1957 called the Second International Congress of Psychiatry. And that started this propelled the further studies into other tricyclic drugs, basically drugs that have three benzene rings in a row. So these were called tricyclic drugs, and this success of imipramine in treating these three patients of depression that Roland Kuhn saw. This propelled further studies into tricyclic drugs and the use of imipramine and other tricyclic drugs for treating depression. However, nowadays, instead of imipramine and these other tricyclic drugs, people use SSRIs or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors to treat depression. And how do these SSRIs work? Basically, they prevent the reuptake of serotonin at the presynapse. So once serotonin has finished its action at the synapse, serotonin is a neurotransmitter, it is released. It once it has one After it is released, generally to stop its action, it is again taken back. It is so there is reuptake of serotonin at the presynapse. At the presynaptic side, there is reuptake of serotonin in general. But for treating depression, what is done is that there are inhibitors which prevent the reuptake of serotonin. So there is a longer persistence of serotonin at the synaptic cleft. And this has been shown to help in treating depression. So nowadays, rather than tricyclic drugs, it is these SSRIs which which have been shown to have greater success and therefore are used more widely in treating depression. Next, what type of drug is meprobamate? So what is meprobamate and how was it started? Like how did people realize how it can be used and so on? So far we had discussed about the drugs that were used for treating uh, psychosis, right? So major kinds of mood disorders, such as those for mania, those for manic depressive disorders, those for depression and schizophrenia, and so on, right? So these were also the severe types of psychotic disorders, the severe mood disorders, such as schizophrenia and depression. For those, we discussed what were the drugs that were being used. But there are also other disorders which, for example, like tension and anxiety and headaches and agitation and insomnia. These were considered to be distinct from the psychosis. And these kind of minor ones, these kind of other kind of disorders were categorized as neurosis. Nowadays, although neurosis is not commonly, this term is not much in practice, these were earlier called as neurosis. So, for the treatment of neurosis, also people wanted some kind of drugs. The problem was initially at that time, minor tranquilizers like alcohol and tobacco and opiates and barbiturates, all of these were regarded as relief for these kind of neuroses. But all of these, in addition to the calming effects, were also extremely addictive and not good for health. So, there was a requirement for some kind of calming agents for neurosis. So, these were called as anxiolytics, or those which stopped anxiety, or calming agents for neurosis. So, one of that, so again, people were actually trying to do something else, they were trying to look for something else, and they chanced upon something else. Again, in this case, it was meprobamate. So, in 1940s, when people were trying to develop drugs against penicillin resistant bacteria, during research for that, Frank Berger synthesized mefenicin, and he saw that this mefenicin, when injected in high doses, made animals limp. The animals were fully conscious, but their muscles became relaxed and they became uh, kind of sedated and limp. So he called this as tranquilization. And he said that mefenicin is able to relax muscles and relieve anxiety, but it is not clouding consciousness. But the problem was that mefenicin was metabolized very fast and therefore it could not be used. Then meprobamate, which was a derivative of mefenicin, was synthesized and in 1954, and it was shown that it was metabolized more slowly. And this meprobamate so was released to the US market as Miltown, and it was claimed to be the first anti-anxiety drug which acts as a minor tranquilizer. But the problem is that meprobamate failed because of the problems. So it several problems, because it did indeed induce drowsiness, although they thought initially that it does not. But actually meprobamate induced drowsiness. It caused tolerance in individuals who were taking it, and it led to addiction. So meprobamate fell out of favor. So coming back to the question, what type of drug is meprobamate? So meprobamate was regarded as a minor tranquilizer. It was initially studied and shown to act as a minor tranquilizer. Therefore, it was marketed for as the first anti-anxiety drug for neuroses such as tension and anxiety and so on. Next question. What neurotransmitter do benzodiazepines affect? So again, what are benzodiazepines and what do they do? So we discussed that meprobamate, although it was initially thought to act as an anxiety relieving anti-anxiety drug and a minor tranquilizer, but later it was shown that it causes drowsiness, addiction, and tolerance to large doses. But there was still a requirement for a an anti-anxio, so basically an anxiolytic medicine, which did not induce drowsiness. So, at that time, Leo Sternbach decided that he decided on a more risky approach. So Leo Sternbach was from Poland, and he had worked with various chemicals back in Poland, including some dyes. So he thought that, so generally at that time the practice was that an already existing and an already reported drug, an already known drug, was usually the chemists and the people in pharmaceutical companies, they used to work around modifying the existing drugs to identify new drugs with more potent actions. But Leo Sternbach decided that let me start with a more risky approach. Let me start out with something completely new, something completely unrelated. So he started with working on the 3,1,4 benzoxidazepines. What are these? These compounds have a basic side chain, and this kind of a presence of a basic side chain has been shown to be there in many drugs which have biological activity. And this basic side chain has been shown to be having active properties which are responsible for those kind of drugs, the role of those drugs in biological systems. So he tried to play around with these drugs, these compounds, but he was not able to achieve anything useful initially. So his company told him that, look, this is not going anywhere. You just you stop working on this. You go back to working on other projects. So he let it be. He stopped working on it. He didn't have a choice. So he stopped working on it. But one day, while he was cleaning out his place, his I think his laboratory, he saw that there was this one last compound that was left. That was called Rho 50690, and that had not yet been tested. So he submitted to his company. He submitted this to his company's the department that carries out these tests, and he requested them to check this compound. And it was observed serendipitously that this compound is an extremely potent muscle relaxant and a sedative, but it has no anesthetic properties, and it also has very low toxicity. So He decided to study this in greater detail. He synthesized it in large quantities, and he tried to find out what it is, how it is, and how it works, and so on. So its what was its chemical structure? It was a quinazoline 3 oxide. It belonged to the benzodiazepine class, and he named it as chlordiazep, sorry, chlordiazepoxide. He named this compound as chlordiazepoxide. But the problem was that when it was taken to clinical trials, the initial results were discouraging. So it was observed that the subjects were sleepy and dizzy, and they started having slurred speech, and it was thought that this is not going to work, and they were going to stop it. But then they tried using lower doses, and the lower doses worked very well. Then in the US, it was marketed under the name Librium, and later, in order to reduce the bitter taste that was associated with Librium, uh, the compound was tweaked, and later, the new compound that was released was diazepam or Valium, which was less bitter to taste, and this was released in 1963. And diazepam became a big hit, and right now, currently, there are various variants of diazepam which are in the market and which are being used, similar to the way benzodiazepine the initial benzodiazepines were used. Later in 1960s, it was shown that the way the benzodiazepines work is actually because of their relation to inhibitory synapses using the neurotransmitter GABA. And later it was also shown that in addition to their role as muscle relaxants and the the fact that they are able to uh, cause muscle relaxation and reduce anxiety, but did not have any kind of anesthetic properties. It was also later shown, much later, that benzodiazepines can also act as anticonvulsants or anti-epileptic agents, basically. So coming back to the question, which neurotransmitter do benzodiazepines affect? Benzodiazepines have an effect on GABA. Next, what term did Selye replace alarm reaction with? Again, this is something we had discussed a little while ago when we discussed about what Hans Selye did and how he studied and how he coined the term stress. So, we know that when Hans Selye was studying the effects of different kinds of non-specific noxious agents in rats, he saw that there is a typical syndrome which is characterized by three different stages, and the syndrome is appears because of the as a response to damage itself rather than as a response to an individual, it's not based on the nature of the damaging agent. It is a general response to damage itself. And this syndrome is characterized by three different stages, and he termed this syndrome as a general adaptation syndrome. And he saw that the body is acting in a way in which there is a large amount of histamine that is being released, and he said that in this general adaptation syndrome there is an alarm reaction that is happening. So the body is reacting in alarm towards the damage, and later he replaced this term alarm reaction, I think around in 1949, 1950, so on. He replaced this term alarm reaction with the term stress. So Hans Selye was the one who coined the term stress for this syndrome, which acts as a response to damage of the body in any way. So, what term did he replace alarm reaction with? He replaced the term alarm reaction with the term stress. Next, what did Claude Shannon optimize using electromechanical relays? So, Claude Shannon was actually, so during his master's thesis, Claude Shannon understood the use of Boolean algebra. So again, let me go back to the text. Yeah. So in 1854, George Boole, who was a mathematician in Ireland, he came up with this treatise called An Investigation of the Laws of Thought, on which are founded the mathematical theories of logic and probabilities. So he gave this idea or these rules of and, or, and not. So these are the logic, the Boolean logic that he came up with. So if both x and y, this is the and function. So there's both this is happening and that is happening. So two things are happening at once. That is the and operation. Then comes the this or that. For example, A or B. So that is the or function. Then comes the this and not this. So K and not L. In that case, it's the and not function. So using these rules that George Boole had proposed in 1854, he had proposed them, but it was not, people were not, had not taken notice of it much. It was not actually put into use in any way. But Claude Shannon, in his master's thesis, which is regarded as one of the most influential master theses of the 20th century, he optimized this Boolean algebra using electromechanical relays. And he said that the properties of electrical switches can be used to propose logic. So this Boolean algebra can be used to process logic, and this was an extremely important idea that he proposed. So, what did Claude Shannon optimize using electromechanical relays? He optimized Boolean algebra using electromechanical relays, and in fact, interesting tidbit: the AI tool that known as Claude is actually named in on to honor Claude Shannon. So Claude Shannon later also worked on artificial intelligence, and he worked on the Theseus maze. It is a very interesting thing that he developed. So he developed this maze in which a mechanical mouse would be allowed to move using electromechanical relays, and he built that using his wife, along with his wife Betty. Do read about it. And therefore, Claude Shannon is also regarded to have worked on artificial intelligence. He was the one who optimized Boolean algebra. He also made several other contributions. Next, what was the main purpose of the ENIAC computer? Again, we have discussed how the ENIAC computer came into place, and what was its purpose, and how was it built. So let me briefly just tell you about it again. So we know that John Mockley, when he had come in contact with Jean Atanasoff, he became interested in building a digital computer, and he took an advanced a course in advanced electronics so that he can do that. And then, together with Presper Eckert, he developed a computer that was using based on vacuum tubes for memory, and it was completely electronic in nature. They called this as the electronic numerical integrator and computer. And this for this he they received funding from the ordnance department of the Department of War at the United States. And the purpose for which this computer was built was so that it can help the army to calculate ballistic trajectories for aiming artillery. So basically, to help in the war efforts at that time. So, what was the main purpose of the ENIAC computer? The main purpose of the ENIAC computer was to compute ballistic trajectories to help the army. Next, what is a key feature of the EDVAC computer? So the EDVAC computer was the next generation computer after the ENIAC computer, and this EDVAC computer again was built together by Mockley, Eckert, and with inputs from John von Neumann. So this is the EDVAC computer, the full form of which is Electronic Discrete Variable Computer. And what was so how what was the how did the EDVAC computer work? The EDVAC computer uh, contained a stored program to run the calculations through the CPU, and it also contained a memory for storing both the data from the calculations as well as for storing the programs that ran these calculations. So what was a key feature of the EDVAC computer? A key feature of the EDVAC computer was that it used stored programs for computations. Because it had a memory, that memory allowed it to store programs, and those programs could be accessed to make computations. Next, which of the following concepts is not a central idea of cybernetics? So, what was cybernetics? So, cybernetics was a term which was coined by Norbert Wiener. So Norbert Wiener was a uh, was a son of a Harvard professor, and he was a very extremely brilliant individual who was homeschooled initially, and he finished his PhD. He did his PhD from Harvard at the age of 18 in mathematical logic. He was also invited to join the Manhattan Project, but unlike Newman, we discussed about how Newman worked on the Manhattan Project, right? So John von Neumann had worked on the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb. He was also a member of the Manhattan Project. However, Norbert Wiener declined to be a part of, so he refrained from joining the Manhattan Project on ethical grounds, and he instead decided to work on ballistics and communication theory. And he decided to work on control theory. So he saw that there are feedback loops which control the output of a system. and ensure that it is always near a desired set point. And he became extremely interested in understanding how such a control theory or such feedback loops might apply to human behavior. And for that, he gathered many influences. He was influenced by the logical calculus that was developed by Maculloch and Walter Pitts. He was influenced by the idea of autonomous robots that Gray Walter had proposed, and also by the then current knowledge of neurophysiology and neuroanatomy. And on the basis of all of that, he decided to invent this term called cybernetics, which is basically derived from the Greek term called Greek term for steersman, or basically the one who steers a ship or a boat. So he said that this field of cybernetics, or the control and or the theory for control and communication, which it can be applied to both animals as well as to machines. And this control theory, which involves feedback loops, we know that in animals, almost everything, for example, temperature, for example, many different kinds of drugs, many different kinds of processes, many different kinds of pathways, all of them rely on feedback loops. So even in the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, we know that there is a feedback loop. So both animals and machines, he showed. I mean, he defined the idea of the control theory, or the term cybernetics, for such kind of feedback loops to control the output of the system. So the fundamental ideas of cybernetics was that the system will sense an input, and on the basis of that input, an output will be generated to achieve a particular goal. Now this output will then, on the basis of the output, there will be an adjustment in the so because of the output will again influence the system. So it will provide a feedback to the system to again adjust the actions of the system to produce a new output. So it will be a loop. So each time an input is sensed, it will give rise to an output, and then that output will again go back. I mean, because of the output, there'll be a feedback which will influence the system to generate a new output by adjusting the actions of the system. So the central concepts of cybernetics were, in case of error signals, self-organization, self-reproduction, and goal-directed behavior. So if you want to achieve any goal, you will, on the basis of the inputs and the outputs that you generate, whatever action is taking place, when the system will sense the action, the system will adjust itself accordingly to modulate its output again. So that will influence whether the system is able to move towards its goal. So that is, so the central concepts that were involved in cybernetics and control theory were error signals, self-organization, self-reproduction, and goal-directed behavior. So coming back to the question, which of the following concepts is not a central idea of cybernetics? So we know that feedback loops are the one of the important bases of control theory and cybernetics. Goal directed behavior is also one of the key concepts. And of course, error signals. So, which of them is not a central idea? Time travel is not in a central idea of cybernetics. In fact, it has nothing to do with cybernetics. So, with that, we come to the end of the previous year assignment questions. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the discussion forum for the course. I'll be happy to address your questions. Thank you very much for attending the course, attending the interactive session. Uh, I'll be sharing the YouTube video link as well as the course, the class slides on the Google Sheet for the course. So with that, I'll end the meeting. Thank you very much to everyone who attended the session. Have a happy weekend.